Before we start the video, just a quick heads up. This is part 5 in a series I'm doing covering the Super Monkey Ball franchise. It's not required, but I recommend checking out the previous chapters for additional context. With that being said though, hey there, I'm Kardino, and welcome back to Fallout, a Super Monkey Ball retrospective. While Deluxe may have disappointed some, fans didn't have to wait long for another game as the new entry was right around the corner. In December of 2005, Super Monkey Ball DS was released in Japan and was later released worldwide in February 2006 with the subtitle Touch and Roll. As you probably inferred from the name, the game was released on Nintendo's brand new device and made a point to utilize both screens to enhance the experience. So, is it any good? I'm gonna write that down as a maybe. Save that for Mimi, okay? I suppose the first thing to talk about is the art style. The menus, UI, and character art are all done in this hand-drawn comic book style. Meanwhile, the surrounding worlds are once again that mix of cartoon and realistic that the other games all used. And I really like this. If the game had tried to use the 3D versions of the characters, it would have probably looked like garbage. Instead, they decided to go with a version that's not just more aesthetically pleasing, but also is probably less taxing on the hardware. By the way, I love how the monkey on the bottom screen will react to what's happening on the top. He may just be running along or panicking whenever he's falling or spinning out of control. It's such a neat and honestly kinda cute touch. But that's not all. Since the DS was roughly twice as powerful as the GBA, even the overworld graphics got a major upgrade and it looks much better. Obviously, there's only so much detail you can fit on a 256p screen, but it's better than Junior. And really, that's just it. This game at first glance gets an easy ride because it's going to be compared with Junior. And next to each other, Touch and Roll will make Junior look like trash every time by default. But looks aren't everything. Let's look at the actual content on display here. Heading into challenge mode, we see our first big deviation from the formula. Instead of separating everything into 3 or 4 difficulties, the game opts to use worlds instead. There are 10 worlds, plus 2 secret ones, with 10 levels each, meaning this game has 120 stages, which is even more than SMB1 on the GameCube. Again, considering this was a portable game, that sounds really impressive. Until you look at the stages themselves. A lot of these ones are ripped from 1 and 2, maybe recreated and retextured, but it still is a pretty severe blow. And it's not like a few returning ones would be the biggest issue either, but out of the 120 here, only 57 are actually new, meaning that more than half of the content here is stuff we've already seen. And again, it's not like these levels are bad by any means, but it makes the game lose a bit of its identity, especially considering how many times they've reused the same levels. Oh, but wait, they did take the time to change all the names, so good luck keeping track of them. Thanks for making my life harder, guys. But again, at least the content we have here is very well designed, and the new courses are really cool, some even offering ideas that would have felt right at home in 2. For example, one has you moving on a kind of car while it tilts back and forth, and another has you playing on a pinball table where the goal's at the top. And all the rest, even if they aren't as memorable, still fit in well with the rest. I mean, heck, they didn't hold back even with the returning stages. I'd see a stage like Wheel of Fortune show up and go, oh no they didn't, with a big grin on my face. Another change I like are the worlds. Yeah, there's some typical themes like jungle and ice, but there's a couple that I find really memorable near the end. There's a game studio, a disco laser place, and straight up, the Big Bang. And even in World 1, the time of day will gradually change. So it starts out with a sunlit lake, but as you advance, the sun sets, and by the end, it's night and you can see fireworks in the distance. But moving on, the world map wasn't the only thing changed in challenge mode. Another big difference is the way lives work. Where in the others you start with just 3, here you start with 5 and you only need 10 bananas to get more. Considering a 1-up was 50 in Junior or 100 in the main game, This makes it way easier to stack up your life counter. Now, this may seem like a bad decision, and if that was the only big change, there would be no question. But they also made the decision to remove continues. If you run out of lives, that's as far as you go and you're kicked to the main screen. And since there aren't any extra levels this time, I can see why they thought them unnecessary. At the very least, it was an interesting idea and I hesitantly give it a pass. But I would have at least said to make it 20 bananas per life to make it a bit more challenging. I mean, they did make bunches only worth 5 now, but still. I figure they already thought the game was challenging enough though, not just because of the stages, but at least partially because of the controls. See, whatever graphical improvements the DS had over the GBA, there was still one limitation it still had, that being the D-pad. In Junior, I said this made the game unplayable, so one would expect touch and roll to be similar. But interestingly enough, it's a bit better this time. The main reason for this is that the physics engine and collision are much more accurate to the GameCube games this time, so it feels like you're in a bit more control from the get-go. Also, instead of having buttons to speed up or slow down, your speed is simply determined by how long you hold the button. Again, it's still 8 directions and isn't nearly as precise as a control stick, but it's definitely an improvement over Junior. But that isn't the only method of control. On the bottom screen, you can touch in any direction to move. The farther towards the edge of the screen you tap, the faster you'll roll. And unlike the D-pad, this gives you the full range of movement. In theory, this should sound like an okay option, and I do know people who use this as their default method. But for me, it was just too imprecise. I feel like there's a pretty large error margin to account for, add in the fact that you need to hold the DS with one hand like this, and you've got a control scheme about as consistent as my upload schedule. Nice attempt, but I'll just stick to the D-pad, thanks. It may have fewer directions, but at least I know for certain where I'll go. And while we're talking about the bottom screen, I wish I could change it to get a bird's eye view map instead of just eye. It was a great addition to the GameCube games, and I wish it was brought back in some form. Speaking of maps though, let's talk about the progression. Like I said, the levels are laid out on a world map in bunches of 10, but an interesting choice they made is that they don't have to be completed in a strict order. You start with one world unlocked, of course, but then you unlock them in groups of 2 or 3. Yeah, you still need to complete all the worlds available to unlock the next set, but I like the flexibility here. If you're having trouble with a couple levels from one world, you can just skip it for now and try something else. So if you think about it, this is kinda like a fusion of story mode and the traditional challenge sets from 2. This was a really clever way to design the game around portability. Let's face it, Junior had enough issues on its own, but when you also consider that you need to dedicate some serious time to playing a level set, especially expert, it didn't do the game any favors. But in touch and roll, it's much more plausible to pick up the game, try a couple runs through a world or two, then put it back down. Playing into this portable nature though, there's literally no story in the game or the manual, so that's a bummer. Although I guess you could consider this a side title, so it isn't the biggest issue. But as I mentioned earlier, there are 2 secret worlds after the regular 10. You unlock one after finding the 2 secret goals in the game, and the other by collecting 2006 bananas. Only it actually starts counting once you unlock world 11, and even then, it only works for that world once you've beaten it. So you literally have to grind through the worlds you've already completed until you've gone that counter up. On one hand, I get that it's a fun goal to work towards for a pick up and play game, plus the fact that they made the number 2006 is just plain fun. But there is no denying that this is shameless padding. I mean, considering you collect around 80 to 100 bananas per world, you're literally going to have to play the same set of worlds about 20 times to get it. Not the best design choice if you ask me. Oh, and have fun not being able to skip the credits either. So every time you beat a world, you either have to play through a 5-minute minigame, albeit a pretty fun one, or reset the game and hope it saves. I genuinely think this was an oversight, but it's a pretty big one and it gets old real quick. Now, besides the option of recording replays, which was absent from Junior, the only other option for the main game is practice mode. And it's exactly what you'd expect. But of course, with this being a monkey ball game, we get some mini games here too. There are 6 in total, and 2 of them are completely new. But one interesting decision is that for these, touch controls are mandatory, meaning that my D-pad crutch gets thrown out the window. But anyway, it's that time again. Time for my quick opinions on each. Monkey Race is a mixture of old and new courses, and they're all pretty good. The items are from 2 this time, and they're assigned to your D-pad. It feels okay, but I wish there was an option to use only button controls. Other than that, it's mostly what you'd expect. The turning might be slightly sharper, so that's at least better, but it's still not ideal. Oh yeah, and the music can get kinda obnoxious. Monkey Fight, like in 2 you have both normal and survival mode, but the stages don't crumble in the latter. All the stages and items are from 1, which is fine I suppose if they're gonna shamelessly reuse content. But man, the touch controls really ruin this game. The controls are even more slippery this time, and your hand is blocking half the screen where the action is. The top screen just shows a map, because that's what we needed in a boxing arena. Definitely pales to other versions, even to Junior. Monkey Bowling, it's the same game from 1, but this time you flick the cursor to determine your direction and speed, which makes it about as accurate as it sounds. And spinning doesn't help much because for some reason they made you choose it before you aim. Give me the GameCube version any day. Monkey Hockey, here's our first new one since 2, although it's actually more like air hockey. But it's actually pretty fun. Using the 2 screens was a neat idea as you drag your striker on the touchscreen and see your opponent's side on the top. The items are in the corner of the board and give an almost Mario Kart level of BS to the game. They can make the other goal bigger or adjust the size of your strikers, although the game can get pretty unfair when your opponent's this giant behemoth while your striker is the size of a Tic Tac. But that's not the only mode. Line Smasher is where you can draw your own striker. As long as you have enough clay, I suppose, you can draw whatever you want. Not only that, but if the ball flies into you at high speed, some of your striker will fly off and you'll need to redraw it before it gets too small. Honestly, it's an awesome idea and the entire game is the best one so far. Monkey Wars, this is a first-person shooter where you roll around a maze-like map hunting for other players. You move with the D-pad and turn and shoot with the touchscreen. This sounds really clunky, but I eventually got used to it, but I can imagine you get some serious hand cramping after a while. At least the game is really fun with different weapons like pies and watermelon seeds to attack your opponents. It's a great addition and one that works especially well when everyone has their own system. Monkey Golf, we got new courses this time, so that's cool, but we've turned back to mini golf, understandably. The biggest difference though is the way you aim. You use the touchscreen to first aim where you want to go, then lift the club to the right height before slamming it down. It's a gimmick for sure, but one I found really fun. And there's even a couple risky paths to take if you're feeling adventurous. Per usual, let's talk multiplayer next. As you'd expect, you can connect with 3 other people via the DS wireless communications. You can't play the main game, but you can at least play the mini-games. It can get a bit laggy sometimes, but overall, it's pretty fun. But what if your friend doesn't have a copy of the game? Well, this game also supports DS download play, although there are a couple drawbacks. For one, only Race, Hockey, and Wars are available, the others are just flat out blocked. And even then, you have to play with preset rules with no option for customization. I get why they did this since download play is a pretty slow system to begin with, but still, it's a tad disappointing. Looking at touch and roll as a whole, I think the best way to describe it is what Junior should have been. It has its limitations and problems too, quite a few of them in fact, but for being a portable monkey ball in 2006, it's pretty neat. I gotta emphasize again how much I love the fact that they took the time to restructure the game to be more portable friendly too. Oh, and for the most part, the music in this game is great. It actually features all new songs instead of stealing or recreating them. I gotta say though, the DS sound card does not do these compositions justice. They went for this almost goofy cartoon style to compensate, but it ranges from pretty good to pretty meh. But other than that, I don't really have many complaints about the presentation. There are even some fun Easter eggs like a secret balloon popping minigame on the title screen, even if II is twerking the entire time. Let me put it this way, Junior felt like the developers were asking, can we put this GameCube game on a GBA? Both touch and roll, it feels like the question was more, how can we adapt these games to work best on a DS? And the result is a game that is much more enjoyable to play, at least for me. Again, I'm not saying this game is perfect, and I'd recommend the console games any day. Heck, I'll be the first to admit that if the game was controlled with a stick, it would be the easiest game by far. But what we have here is more than passable. So now, Sega had ported the game to every relevant console of the generation. So now there was no doubt. It was time for another big game. And soon enough, Sega announced that there was indeed a new game in the works, albeit a side game called Super Monkey Ball Adventure. We'll cross that bridge soon enough, but for now, this marks the end of what many fans would call the classic era of Monkey Ball. Or does it? Because what if I told you there was more to this classic era than a lot of people know? Until next time, thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.